In this video, we will show you how to replace your front brakes, pads and rotors on this Kia Forte Koup. This will be located behind your front wheel. Let's get into it. Okay friend, let's get started on our job. The first thing you need to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. Once you've done that, we'll continue on to removing all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts and then the wheel. To start disassembling this, we're going to have to push back the caliper piston. The caliper piston is located inside of this area of the caliper, and to push it back easily, you can use a small pry bar. You want to make your way inside the slot of the caliper. We'll press up against the caliper and the rotor and gently start pushing this outward, pushing in the piston. Once you have movement from that, we'll continue on to our 2 caliper slider mounting bolts. We'll be using a 14mm on each of these mounting bolts. When removing the caliper slider mounting bolts, typically I like to remove the first one, a quick inspection, and start it back in just a couple threads. That'll hold this in place. Now we can fully remove the lower bolt as well. Hold on to that caliper, fully remove that first bolt that we already had out and inspected, and we'll set those aside. Go ahead and remove the caliper from the caliper bracket and the brake pads. Once you have it off, before you set it aside, we need to pay attention to this area right along the piston. If you see any fluid coming out of here, this is actually a dust boot, and that means the internal seal of the caliper is bad, and it's a good idea to go ahead and replace that caliper. This one looks fine, so we'll set it aside, putting no pressure on our flex hose. We'll continue on with that small pry bar or small prying device. Go ahead and remove each of your brake pads. Give them a close inspection, and we'll set those aside. With this turned, we can see each of the 2 caliper bracket mounting bolts. You'll be using a 17mm for each. You know the process. We'll fully remove the upper and start it back in just a couple threads, fully remove the lower afterward. Each one of these bolts should have a locking washer on them. We want to inspect these, make sure they're still in good working order. If anything has to be replaced, of course you want to make sure you do that. This looks fine. That one off of there, we've got our washer as well. Remove your bracket, set it aside. Continuing from here, it's time to remove the brake rotor. When doing this, go ahead and start on one of your original lug nuts, just a couple threads. After completing doing that, what you're going to be paying attention for is Phillips head screws holding the brake rotor to the wheel hub located just behind it. Typically, you're only going to find one. I've got one here, and I have an open port on the opposite side of the rotor. To remove the Phillips head screw, it's easiest using an impact tool here. We've got our Phillips bit. We'll put this on here, turn it counterclockwise, and while holding pressure, we'll give this a loving tap with a hammer. Once you've removed that screw, give it a quick inspection. It is a good idea to reuse these, but it's not completely necessary. We will be reusing this, it's still in good enough condition. Go ahead and take hold of that brake rotor, and we'll start removing this. To remove the brake rotor, remove your lug nut and slide it right on off of there. There it is, friend. Now that we have the brakes out of the way, the next thing we need to do before installation of the new brakes is to clean and inspect the mounting surface on your wheel bearing hub. That's this surface here. To do this, you can use a wire brush and even some sandpaper if necessary. We'll continue with some copper anti-seize on the mating surface of the hub where your rotor is going to sit. Now it's time to install the brake rotor. As you remember, during the removal process, we had mounting screws holding it in place. You want to make sure you have those mounting screw ports aligned with the proper orientation of the hub. While holding that on there, we'll continue on with that mounting screw, start it in, snug it up. We'll use our impact driver, just give this a couple taps, make sure it's secure. Let's pay attention to our caliper bracket. We're going to disassemble this, clean it, and lubricate it. To disassemble this, go ahead and remove each of the caliper bracket tins. There's one along each side. Go ahead and use a small prying device for this. Continuing from there, along each side of the caliper bracket, you're also going to have caliper sliders and caliper slider mounting boots. To remove each of these, typically you just grab onto the slider pin itself, start giving it a twist, but you're going to have to grab onto the boot and pull that down and away. As you start removing the slider pins, we're going to have to clean the entire shafted area of the slider pin all the way down to the very end. What you're going to find on one of the slider pins, you have a vibration dampener boot. It's kind of like a little rubber boot right at the very end. The other one won't. It's important for the installation process to reinstall it in the same port as where you had removed it. While inspecting this, I mentioned that rubber boot, but you also want to pay attention to that groove up along where my gloved fingers are. That's where the end of the boot is, and we want to make sure it's not rusted or rotted where moisture or debris can make its way inside, causing brake binding of some sort. This one looks fine. We'll set it aside, continue the process. Now we can start removing the caliper slider mounting boots. For these, typically you just take them, twist them, and pull them right on out of the bracket. If it feels like they're stuck in place, you could try prying them out. Just be careful not to tear it. Once you have it out, we're going to give it a quick cleaning and an inspection. To clean this, we'll use a rag. You can just twist that rag and pull it right on through the far end there. With it pulled through, we'll roll the boot around and remove as much of the grease and debris from on the inside of the boot as possible. We'll give it a quick squeeze. You can tell this is still soft and pliable, and it's definitely not torn, worn, or damaged. We'll set it aside, do the same thing for the other one. After removing everything from the bracket, we'll continue on to cleaning all of the mounting areas. We had the areas where those two tins were. We want to make sure we use a wire brush or some sandpaper in here. Make sure it's a smooth surface with no raised areas. With both sides of that cleaned up, it's time to talk about cleaning out the slider pin ports. There's one on each side of the bracket. We'll be using some parts cleaner and a bore brush, trying to remove as much grease or debris from inside of these as possible. Give it a quick rinse. A thorough inspection. Repeat the process. We'll use some high temperature caliper lubricant. Starting with the areas where those bracket tins go, apply a thin amount. Once you do have that on there, it's time to apply your caliper bracket tins. We'll get these into position and press them in. Once you feel as though they're pressed on, give them a wiggle, make sure they're properly secured in place. Continuing with our high temperature caliper lubricant, we're going to go inside of each one of the ports, lubricating especially on the very edge closest to where my finger is. There's a small groove there, and once again, that's where the boot's going to sit. With that well lubricated, we can start installing the boot. For this, just come in at an angle and gently start pressing it in. Make sure it's properly aligned, give it a little twist, and a tug. Same process for the other one here. We'll just press that right in there, a little twist. Continuing on, we have our slider pins. We're going to lubricate the entire shafted area all the way down to the tip and up closest to my glove fingers into that groove. Let's get this in here. We'll press it in. When you press it in, typically you're going to find that you have a lot of air inside the boot. Go ahead and try to squeeze that out while you press the pin in. A little twist to make sure everything's seated properly, and repeat the process on the other side. Press out the air here, a little twist. Let's get this over to the vehicle. Get this bracket in place, just slide it right on over that brake rotor. We'll continue on with our 2 caliper bracket mounting bolts. Start them in, snug them up, torque these to 70 foot-pounds. Time for the brake pads. Your inner brake pad will have the wear indicator. The wear indicator needs to be facing up. We'll slide that into place. If you have to push it in or use a hammer of some sort, typically it means you did not clean the caliper bracket well enough. The pads need to be able to move in and out freely. Let's get our caliper down. Continue on with your high temperature lubricant. You want to lubricate the piston and the backside of each of the 2 ears on the caliper. This will help with vibration dampening and noise reduction. We'll take this and slide it right on over the brake pads. Once you have it in the proper placement, continue on with your 2 caliper slider mounting bolts. Just start each of these in. You can snug them up. The torque for this is 23 foot-pounds. Start on all 5 of your 21mm lug nuts. We'll bottom them out, get the wheels safely back down on the ground, and we can torque these to 80 foot-pounds. With the wheel back on the ground, we'll be torquing these in a crisscross manner. Okay friend, we showed you how to install one side of your front brakes. The process for one side of the vehicle is the exact same thing as the other. Once you've completed that, make sure you pump up the brake pedal till it's nice and firm. After that, take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.